I'm here today in the Saxon Gardens at the heart of Warsaw. Since 1727, a public garden, one of the first in Europe. But it started life as something more, the garden of a palace built by the first Saxon king of Poland, Augustus II. A member of the Wettin dynasty from Saxony became kings of Poland. Why were they here? What were they doing? Why did they build this palace? And what is more, what is the Saxon axis? An exercise in urban planning. Join me in Poland Daily History today when we find out more. So Piotr, here we are in a building we can actually see today, and that's more or less how it looks today, the Lubomirski Palace, which, if we think of the axis, was just outside just the other side of the Iron Gate.
Yeah.
Which probably we can see, we can recall the Canaletto painting, it was just outside the gate.
In
its more baroque style.
Baroque style, yeah. Because originally that was a palace from mid-17th century, which was still in late Baroque style. And it was parallel to the axis. Yeah, so if you went out from the garden through the Iron Gate, you could see
it on your right-hand side.
Yeah,
yes,
right-hand side, exactly. So that was the Lubomirski Palace, which was going next to the axis, and if you go further, you will reach eventually the barracks of the soldier Saxon soldiers. Yeah.
And again, we see the marvelous colonnades.
Yeah. So actually they reshaped the palace, Lubomirski reshaped the palace in late 18th century in the new fashion, so the classic fashion, of course. So we have this colonnade, which is kind of talking with the colonnade
I think I'm right to say
palace.
That these are Ionic capitals on the columns.
Yeah. So we
Corinthian ones we saw before. Yes.
Exactly, and here we have Ionic like heads of the columns. And but it was also very monumental portico of the main palace, and in late 18th century it was recognized by the people of Warsaw as one of the most fashionable palaces, yeah, because it was up to date. Yeah, it was then recognized even better than those
it must have been marvelous in some ways to be around as an aristocrat in the 18th century, because whereas today people recognize fashion by changing their cars or changing their clothes, in the 18th century, if you're an aristocrat, you could recognize your fashion by just changing the facade of your building.
Yeah.
A rather grander and a rather more permanent gesture, something of course we can revel at today when we see these marvelous monumental buildings.
Especially this kind of families like Lubomirski family, which was one of the most powerful and wealthiest families in the whole kingdom.
Course, yes.
Actually,
so
they could change the fashion with the changing of their palaces. Something that we can still trace on this palace is actually that we have those original Baroque curves on the main parts of the main corpus, but the ornamentation is clearly new classicist ornamentation. With this
exactly right.
imitation of the stone on the bottom level, and then the new. The next levels.
The rustication.
Rustication.
And I think our architectural friends would say. And of course, very, very practical to have. You can drive your carriage in under the arches and in the rain and not get wet.
Exactly.
Your sort of rather splendid porte cochere there. But marvelous. Nice to have this sort of raised terrace area there, which must have been very useful for people who were living in the palace.
Yeah, but they had a great view from the, of course, so-called piano nobile, which was the first story, which was the main, like the most important chambers were always on the first story of the piano nobile. So with this terrace, they can went out from the main rooms to see the view of the Iron Gate, of the saloon, great saloon, and the whole axis at this point.
So that was very. I think I'm right in saying it's actually
situation.
a remarkable survival, because under Augustus II's original plans for the axis and the buildings he wanted to build, the Lubomirski Palace would have been demolished. I think, as I read, as he was going to create this axis. It was in the wrong place and was scheduled for demolition, but he sort of ran out of money in about 1733, I think I read. So we're lucky it survived.
Yeah. That's true, and because of this, that it survived, it was so close to the axis. Actually, it was one of the best actually shown palaces in whole Warsaw. Yeah, one of the best situation of the nobles' palaces in Warsaw.
But for Augustus II, not quite how he envisaged it.
Yeah.
So if he'd had more money, it would have been bought, knocked
Probably.
down, and we'd have had something else. But of course, why this is particularly interesting also as a palace is that, ironically, after the destruction of the war, and when this building was repaired, renovated, they actually did move it, rotate it some 70 to 80 degrees. So ironically, it now is part of the axis.
Yeah, actually, and I think it's better to see it from the back side, actually, of this.
So we can move over and
we can move over
have a look and see how they did it.
Yeah, exactly. Let's do it.
Here we are, and we can see now at the back of the model, and we can see the marvelous work they did to rotate the building almost 90 degrees. Extraordinary.
Yeah. Yes, actually 78 degrees, as I remember, and you can see even this grey parts, which were original annexes, back annexes of the palace. So they rotated from this position, which was parallel to the original axis. Moved actually moved in this like over 70 degrees, and so nowadays. The building actually is kind of closing.
Exactly. It is at the end. It is at the end of the axis. Ironically, the building which Augustus II, who gave us the axis, wanted to destroy, has become the end point of the axis and is perfectly square on the axis.
Yeah.
Extraordinary.
Exactly. And here we can see how they made it technically also. So they used those carved rails and they actually cut the building from its foundation and then put the whole structure on those rails, moved it to the new situation on the new foundation in another place. Yeah, and they managed to do it with such a huge building. So they cut out only part of the annexes which were added to the palace, but the main carpets they moved.
Those buildings have been subsequently demolished. I think they're no longer there, but the palace is, and very much as it appears today, in fact, which is a great. But when you think of what was going on, the fact that actually these buildings were saved and that so much effort went into saving this building, when you think of the political regime at the time, it's actually also a rather remarkable survival.
Yeah, and which is interesting. Actually, it wasn't the only building that was moved during the rebuilding process of Warsaw. There was a church of the Leszno, pre-war Leszno Street. So nowadays the Solidarności, Aleja Solidarności,
yeah, that's right.
One of the main streets in the city center, which was to make the way for the new road. Here they also wanted to close the axis and design differently the whole layout of this place actually. So and it was dividing also with this building, this historical side with a garden, and further on with Krakowskie Przedmieście and the old town, which was this historical part which was rebuilt, and behind that was built the housing estate.
A lot of the new blocks, which
like
we so
huge blocks of
which
flats.
we identify so much with this wonderful communist-inspired architecture. Yes.
Yeah. Sharp division between those. So they closed with this palace, the historical part, and behind the palace that was the beginning of this new
socialist utopia.
Yeah.
Or so they hoped or thought.
Yeah.
I'm glad they actually saved this building, which is much nicer than some of the other buildings which appear. But again, it is just as a feat of engineering. It's wonderful to see that so much can be done to save buildings if there's the will to do it.
If there's a will to do it, exactly. So they saved the building, and they changed it looks completely different also nowadays than it used to look back in times. So actually, it was also historically, before World War II, it was on the edge of the so-called northern district and the trading district and the Jewish district of Warsaw. Yeah, so it was also always on the kind of a border of this elegant royal park, and it's more like a trade district with different trade markets around them.
The market
Mirovsky, like a mansion court, like which was one of the the covered trading first.
Yes, and if you for those who are familiar with the geography of Warsaw, if then go beyond Mirovsky and further west, you get to the area which became different story, which became the area of the Jewish ghetto, of course, which also suffered tremendous destruction. So you're right, it is in a funny sort of way, it is sort of closing of the gate in sort of historical and sort of architectural terms, and creating this new border between ancient or historic royal Warsaw and the new socialist utopia.
Yeah, so which shows also that if we talk about the urban planning, also in 1970s, 60s, it's quite often had sense also. Yeah, if we put apart a bit of this ideology, yeah, sometimes that was like really meant to make different divisions. No matter what we think about those blocks of flats from 70s, that's a completely different stories. Yeah, but it was made to close the.
Well, it does show that
access.
it's actually somebody didn't have a plan, which is actually quite interesting that they had a plan. Well, and I think in architectural terms, it's actually probably quite a logical thing to have done. In fact.
Yeah.
That you would have thought, okay, how can we do this? And let's just move the palace through 78 degrees. Extraordinary.